episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show with another truly fascinating guest who is helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us. Today we are honored to be joined by Dr. Rachel Ramoni, who is the Chief Research and Development Officer at the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, also known as the VA, where she oversees the VA's national research enterprise, which encompasses somewhere around 2,000 active projects across 100 different sites, a total budget of around $2 billion in direct VA support and research funding for various outside entities such as the National Institutes of Health and other federal agencies. And as a little background for our non-U.S. guests, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, it's a federal cabinet level agency that provides comprehensive healthcare services to military veterans across 1,000 or so medical sites. Serves about 9 million enrolled veterans every year, employs around 400,000 people with a budget of around $200 billion. So not a small enterprise. Dr. Ramoni earned her Doctor of Medicine in Dentistry degree from Harvard School of Dental Medicine. She also had a Master in Science and a Doctor of Science in Epidemiology from the Harvard School of Public Health. She was previously on the faculty of New York University College of Dentistry in the Department of Epidemiology and Health Promotion, and at Harvard Medical School in the Department of Biomedical Informatics. And while at Harvard, she founded and led the Undiagnosed Diseases Network Coordinating Center, which is funded by the NIH and brings together clinical and research experts from across the U.S. to solve so-called challenging medical mysteries using advanced technologies. Dr. Ramoni's interests are quite broad, including informatics, genomics, precision medicine. Prior to the Undiagnosed Disease Network, she was the director of the Substitutable Medical Applications Reusable Technology Project, or SMART, which was originally launched federal funding and aims to make it easier for providers across different healthcare systems to securely share electronic health records. Dr. Ramoni's also led research projects aimed at improving dental care nationwide. She worked on implementing standard diagnostic terms for dentistry and developed a patient safety system that would help dentists identify and prevent adverse events. She's extensively published. Her publications have appeared in a broad range of literature from birth defects research, epidemiology, circulation, JAMA. All that being said, welcome Dr. Rachel Ramoni to the show.
Well, thank you. Unfortunately, you're hearing my dogs.
That's okay. They can join us too.
Who are upset, my boon companions here during the pandemic, and unfortunately talkative. I live in a condo here in Washington, D.C., and they object to people in the hallway. I may have to go, wag a finger at them in a second.
No problem. We'll edit all that out if need be. But it's great seeing you, Rachel. And I'd like to start off, similar to the last time we chatted a bit by sort of handing you the floor for a little bit, just to reintroduce yourself to the audience and sort of, if you could take us on that little journey that it's always been in the past about sort of from the point early in your life when your father was very encouraging of your early interests in science to that time, that very interesting point where somebody, I guess the White House called you up and said, hey, I have a job for you. So if you could take us to that early stage, I think that lays the ground for a lot of what we're going to be talking about for the VA.
Yeah, sure. So, I was born in Chicago, but raised in Texas, and I have very fond memories of being in Chicago. And my favorite museum was the Museum of Science and Industry there, a great museum if you haven't been there. And my parents, I'm an only child. My parents indulged all sorts of whims that I had, including keeping a scorpion in a jar in my room and all sorts of terrible things. And of course, I was the kid who got the microscope and the chemistry sets and all sorts of things. So from very early on, my parents did encourage my interest in science, and I ended up going to a great place, Texas Academy of Mathematics and Science, which is a hybrid high school college experience at the University of North Texas. And, that just, it was a fantastic program. Big shout out to the state of Texas for that. And ultimately, I ended up at the Harvard School of Dental Medicine. And there, you know, it's kind of a funny, people often are like, you're a dentist? And failed dentist, I guess. And I often like to point out that the deputy director of the National Institutes of Health, Lawrence Tabak, is also a dentist. So we are hiding in plain sight here. But then ultimately, you know, what I realized, so I was going along the path of becoming kind of an academic dentist, and dabbling in research and teaching and dentistry. And I realized pretty early on that research is what drew my interest. So I got a PhD from Harvard School of Public Health, and also a certificate in dental public health from the dental school. So it was still a combined program. And that really set me on a different path because, you know, I really realized that what I wanted to focus on was research, and I kept going along the development path there. And one of the things I like to tell people is that you don't have to follow the prescribed path to end up happy and productive even. So I had a K award from NIH, which is a career development award. And it really made a big difference in my life. It gave me protected time to do research, and I did the unthinkable. I abandoned my K award in order to go be the executive director of what was that very long name you just said, substitutable, I can't even say it, substitutable medical apps, reusable technologies, which I'm proud to say has led to actually the interchange format that medical records today and even Apple HealthKit uses to talk to medical records. So, because I had an epiphany that I didn't just want to be a solo researcher. I described it, and maybe I told you this, of wanting to be a high level and reasonably well paid facilitator of research. And I think that's still what I am. So I just went on continuing leading large projects, the Undiagnosed Diseases Network Coordinating Center, which, you know, for anybody who's living with a mysterious medical condition, I encourage you to apply to that amazing, amazing program. I learned so much about humility in the face of individuals, really the challenges that individual people face, and the power of science to really help people. And so I was running that program and loving life. And I got contacted by the then Undersecretary for Health. So as you described, there's the VA, you have the Veterans Health Administration within the VA, and the boss of that is the Undersecretary for Health. So at that time, it was David Shulkin. He contacted me and said, would you apply for this job? I got your name from the White House. And I said, like, are you crazy? I had to check into this. So I happened to be going to DC for other reasons. And I'm like, well, pre-COVID, let me meet you in your office, because it just didn't seem that legit to me. So, so long story short, I took on the job, and it's been an incredible privilege. And I can't believe it's been 4 years now. And fun fact about the VA also is that you know, not only VA does healthcare, but it provides benefits like the GI Bill, and also runs all of the beautiful national cemeteries, including Arlington National Cemetery. So it really is an amazing organization.
Absolutely, absolutely. And fun fact on this end, I'm a pharmacist by undergraduate training, and the founder of the Home Depot, Bernie Marcus, was also a pharmacist for 1 year until he decided to found the Home Depot and become a multi-billionaire, which I have not yet become. But getting back to you.
I like the yet there. Yeah. We still have hope, the two of us.
But getting back to you, because that's what this is all about. Yeah, so you know, you mentioned obviously that you are a facilitator, and at the VA you are a major facilitator because you have literally thousands of projects under you. I thought one very interesting place to start out, which we touched on a little bit last time we chatted, was the A Million Veteran program, which is a fascinating program where you're looking to absorb the data in terms of genetics, metabolomics, lifestyle, environment of up to a million veterans, and do all sorts of analyses using some of these tools, AI, machine learning. We talked about it a bit last time, but now, I've seen a lot of news come across my feed in recent weeks. I think one study was where they're using the data at Yale to look at PTSD and other mental conditions. There was one at UCLA where they're talking about sort of the connections between PTSD and heart disease. Could you take us a little bit on, since we last talked about 6 months ago, sort of reintroduce the Million Veterans Project and some of what you're seeing through some of your collaborations?
Yeah, sure thing. Well, first of all, I'll explain a little bit about how the VA works, because I didn't know this until I started working at VA. So when you say people at Yale were using the participating in the analysis of the Million Veteran Program data, and UCLA, what I didn't know until I got here is that the vast majority of researchers at VA also are professors at these major medical centers, because VA has what we call academic affiliations with nearly every medical school across the country. So these Yale professors, these UCLA professors, they are also VA researchers. Which is great because we can really draw upon the expertise, not just of Harvard, not just of Yale, not just of Northwestern, but all of them in our integrated system. So indeed, the Million Veteran Program, which started well before I arrived, I have to give props to my predecessors for this one. They envisioned a program where we could better understand the links between genetic variations and health, specifically among veterans, but also to provide insights for the general population by bringing together a cohort of a million people. And you said up to 1 million people. In fact, now maybe we've gotten grandiose or something, but we describe this as working on our first 1 million people. So we believe that this study needs to continue to remain relevant and vibrant. Can you imagine if we said we were done with the Million Veteran Program and then COVID happened? Right. So we currently have, of course, COVID has had an impact on enrollment because safety first for our veterans, but we have enrolled about 850,000 veteran partners. So, I live in Washington, D.C., and that's greater than the entire population of Washington, D.C. And it represents a significant portion of the people who are at VA. You mentioned that VA has 9 million enrollees. If you can imagine, like almost 10% of those men and women have and people who are binary, transgender, non-binary, transgender. We have all participants in the Million Veteran Program. So all of those people stepping up to participate in this study, to partner with us. And so it's really been a wonderful thing to start seeing findings come out, because we can make insights, especially about veteran-centric conditions, like many of our veterans live with PTSD, to find some of the genetic underpinnings of PTSD. So that's pretty exciting. I think we're just at the beginning. One of my major efforts is to get more access for qualified researchers to Million Veteran Program data, because, I am in the business of being a facilitator, as I said. So I know that if you bring the best scientists to this incredible data set that we have because of these veterans stepping up, we can do more good for these veterans. And that's really what I'm here to facilitate.
Excellent. Another very interesting theme. Several months ago, I was talking to somebody that was in the sort of the vacuum cleaner robot business who first introduced me to this concept of edge computing, that we've moved from this thing called the cloud, which I don't really understand, to the edge, where we have all these weird devices in our home now that we can talk to and they do stuff for us and so forth. And lo and behold, there's a fascinating article recently on how the VA is now teaming up with AT&T to work on edge computing, and how some of these new devices and 5G and other innovations that I don't quite understand that well, but can once again, sort of, for the 9 million veterans that you facilitate for and take care of, interesting ways that we can look after them, especially during COVID, in our homes and via these technologies. Can you talk a little bit about this partnership and a little what you're looking at in terms of digital health and some of these other home-based tools for caring for the veterans?
I'm actually going to give a shout out to this one for other parts of the VA. So VA is a massive system, and we do not hold all of the innovation within research and development alone. So that partnership has been facilitated by others in the VA. But it does mark a great strength of VA, which has been for a long time now. VA has been building out strength in telemedicine, and I think this sort of edge computing, or what used to be called Internet of Things, devices in one's home, is just building upon our ability to bring care and clinical trials is a special area of interest of mine, to bring clinical trials as close to the veterans as we can, because just about 50% of our veterans live in rural populations, live in rural areas, for instance. But we do have to be mindful, and this is a strategic priority of mine that we announced this fiscal year. I've learned to, in the government, there are two, well, maybe 3 New Years now. We're really having, Chinese New Year, the regular solar New Year, and the fiscal New Year, which is October 1st. So for this fiscal year, I announced 2 new strategic priorities, and one of them is to actively promote diversity, equity, and inclusion within our sphere of influence. So, as we look at these technologies, and I'm as excited as can be about them, obviously, because we can reach people that we otherwise couldn't reach, but we have to be mindful of what needs to be in place in order to do that. So good internet connections. And we've had, I do again give a shout out to the Secretary Center for Strategic Partnerships, and secretary refers to the boss of the entire VA. They have done partnerships with a number of mobile providers to give veterans free access to the video connection, so that they can get their health care at home. But in some places, just the infrastructure isn't there. So we've also had, thanks to, again, the Secretary Center for Strategic Partnerships, headed up by Deborah Scher, who's one of my colleagues. They've actually set up spaces in Walmarts, so for people to be able to go and have their video visits. And during this pandemic, we actually did remote consenting in Walmarts sometimes. So to get people's permission or consent to have them participate in a clinical trial. Obviously, we were working to minimize face-to-face, minimizing travel. And so they went to the Walmart and signed up, because that's where you could get the broadband needed to do that. So I do think there's, VA is a great place, because on the one hand, you have this incredible innovation, 5G, you have simulations of surgeries that you can do. On the other hand, you have to mesh that with the reality of serving so many veterans, millions of veterans in rural areas, underserved veterans. And that's why I love the VA, is that you hold that healthy tension between wanting to innovate and wanting to bring everybody along with that innovation.
And, continuing on those lines of innovation, obviously we talked about 6 months ago, we were in the middle of COVID then, we're at a different part of it now. VA has been very active in convalescent plasma work, in obviously testing, because you've got 1,000 plus facilities, and you've done a very good job there. And then I saw something this morning actually that said that you have vaccinated more than something like 42 states so far put together. Or so you're doing amazing things there. Can you just talk about sort of the, I guess, testing, therapy, vaccine ecosystem, and some of the things that have been going on there? And then second part of this, and it's a long question, but I also saw this very interesting, because I know you're very involved and interested in personalized cancer therapies, that you were studying an interesting cancer drug for prostate cancer, and you found out there was some interesting connection to less risk of COVID there as well. So it'd be interesting to talk about that sort of project as well.
Sure thing. So in the, one of the reasons why I thrilled to join the VA is that it is connected with a healthcare system. So whenever we talk about any topic like vaccines, testing, therapeutics, there's always the research side and then the clinical side to that within VA. So yeah, you're right. VA marked its millionth vaccine delivered, going in the same order of prioritization as CDC is recommending. So, I myself working from home, without health conditions, I myself have not been vaccinated. And I think that shows the system working actually. So, in terms of getting vaccines out and in terms of testing, big kudos go to the clinical side for that. We on the research side have had the great thing again about working in the healthcare system is that we pick up on what the healthcare system needs. So another great collaboration we've had with actually our friends in the innovation ecosystem, one of my sister divisions within, I'm part of what is called Discovery, Education, and Affiliate Networks. It is a subpart. You can imagine being so large. The VA is in different business units.
Sure.
I'm in the business unit that includes innovation, and they've been running, a lot of people when there were shortages of swabs or printing out nasal swabs, for the testing. Is Wild West a little bit, not just in VA, but everywhere, because people were publishing kind of the blueprints to these swabs. And so in a collaboration with our colleagues in the innovation ecosystem, and they have a 3D printing network, as well as the FDA, we are running a clinical trial to see, how well do various types of these nasal swabs perform compared to the conventional swabs. And so I think this is an area that right now is not regulated. It's an emerging area, and so it really needs evidence put there. Evidence to help people decide, is really a swab, or might there be differences in terms of, does it actually do what it's supposed to do? And what is the patient experience? Is one more painful than another, for instance? Do they hold up? Do they break? Important questions like that. In the world of therapeutics, we are involved. We do have one of the big clinical trials in convalescent plasma. That is the plasma of people who have recovered from COVID, going back into people who are struggling with COVID in an attempt in an effort to see if those the antibodies and other immune factors contained within that that recovered person's plasma can help the person who's suffering with COVID at that time, as well as we are participants in what's called the active trials. It's part of the government-wide effort to look primarily at monoclonal antibodies.
Okay.
So specifically targeted antibodies to see if those can help. And regard to vaccines, VAs have participated in just about every major vaccine trial for COVID, from Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson. We've had numerous sites and have had enrolled over 1,000 people in these studies. So obviously we're thrilled to be able to give veterans the opportunity to participate, but also VA represents a very diverse population when you think about age, socioeconomic status, and race ethnicity. And so we had, the veterans had a lot to contribute to these studies in terms of ensuring that they were diverse.
And one of those demographics that we talk a lot about on the show are the elderly. I read something also about a sort of a study that you guys were doing in terms of looking at in your care, your elderly care system, sort of the dementia patients, and sort of the care, especially for those extremely vulnerable in that context. Any interesting new projects along those lines, or you want to talk about that one with regard to aged care and innovations that you're looking at in that space at VA?
Well, I think VA took a really good proactive approach in these community living centers. Essentially, that's the VA term for the long-term care or nursing home care. And so, for instance, they did a lot more proactive screening of folks in the CLCs, as we call them. They also did some studies showing that, which is pretty interesting when you still read about people taking temperatures to assess whether somebody might or may not have COVID. Our researchers studied residents of these CLCs over time and had information about whether or not these people had COVID. And really the changes in temperature, it might go up, but never to what you would consider to be a fever. And so one-time measurements didn't seem to be that informative. You had these longitudinal measurements. Many of the people who were in fact infected with COVID, with SARS-CoV-2 and had COVID-19, the disease, just had these blips in their temperature, and sometimes that was short-lived. So it was, actually living life while having this information about research is a pretty interesting thing, because when I pass by doors and they say, there's a nursery, a sort of childcare center near me, and it says no temperature above 100 degrees, and I'm sitting there. I pass by and I'm like, oh, that's terrible. The evidence doesn't support that, but I think it is, we're all trying, in a practical sense, to do our best. And certainly excluding people with a high temperature doesn't hurt.
Absolutely. Rachel, you mentioned earlier on the VA is involved in the extramural and the intramural forms of research, and you collaborate with a variety of groups. For some of the, I guess, what are the smaller, some of the startup companies, the startup innovators that we talk to on the show, can you just talk a little bit about the mechanisms? I know there's the small research grants and all that stuff, but can you sort of go through a little bit about if there's small innovators that want to work with the VA, whether it's on bioinformatics or some other areas of biomedical intervention. What are the processes nowadays? What are the different programs available?
Well, so the only correction I'll make there is that VA is an intramural funder. Okay, so we fund VA researchers, which doesn't mean it just so happens that these VA researchers are also appointed at universities. So we get to draw upon that expertise. So there are a few ways, though, but that's not to say that we don't partner with people. The best advice I would have for smaller companies to work with VA is to find a VA researcher who's working in that area and make connections with them, because then together you can apply for VA research funding. And we have examples of this. For instance, we are doing the clinical trials to get approval for osteo-integrated prostheses. That is, an artificial leg that actually is integrated with a person's bone, and so it becomes really much more part of them. And we're working very closely with a company on that to make that happen. And we are substantially supporting that trial. because it was a need for our veterans. It passed through peer review. We used the sort of standard peer review approaches like NIH does. Something has to be scientifically meritorious. So that would be my recommendation in terms of if you're a small company and you don't have a lot of your own funding to maybe pay for a trial. Now, we also, you know, I mentioned we're working on these vaccine trials. That's instances where you know, the company in question, or in this case, the federal government, is providing funding for the trial. So VA, I might have mentioned before that VA was VA ran the entire dang thing of the study for, which I wasn't a part of, so I can say that proudly on behalf of VA, but not on behalf of myself, with Merck for the first shingles vaccine to be approved in the United States. So Merck was sponsoring this trial, but it was 36,000 veterans enrolled in that study. Yeah, it's a biggie, which led ultimately to everybody, you know, in the U.S. having access to that vaccine to prevent shingles. And of course, now there are more advanced forms of that vaccine, but that's what got the ball rolling, and is an illustration of how companies can support the trials in VA, just as we take NIH support. The other way of working with VA is to you know, apply for extramural places that provide extramural funding, like NIH, DoD, and work with VA as a partner there. So for instance, if you want to do a clinical trial that you think adds value for veterans, and NIH may provide the funding for that trial, but you may have a site within, or several sites within VA. And we now have a partnered research program office that we established basically right when the pandemic began. So you can bet what they're working on right now. That is to facilitate, you know, working with primarily with industry, but also other partners like the vaccine trials, to help navigate, because VA is a big beast, as you mentioned, and we want to make sure that people know we're big, but we're friendly.
Absolutely.
And we want to be guides for people, again, facilitators.
And as you you know, you run the research organization of this big beast. You have, as I mentioned earlier, you were very passionate about informatics, genomics, precision medicine. You must see a lot of technologies out there that you might, you know, we're not going to do this, but this is really cool. What other tools? What interests you in terms of whether it's brain computer stuff or stem cells, or all, you know, all the futuristic stuff? What are you personally interested that if, you know, you could throw $1 trillion more at something, you would work on it? And then also second part of that, I just had a couple weeks ago, I had again, the Dr. David Fagenbaum, who's here in University of Pennsylvania. With Castleman's disease, which I
chasing my cure.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know how many people have it or have ever been diagnosed with it, but are there, thinking back to your work with the Undiagnosed Disease Network, are there interesting undiagnosed mysteries that you think about every now and then while you're working on COVID and cancer? And you know, I'd like to think about that. I would like to look at that case again, or any interesting stories there?
Yeah, you know, the Undiagnosed Diseases Network, in fact, it was the person from the White House who recommended me for you know, consideration for this job. His name is Matt Might, and he, in addition to being an amazing computer scientist and precision medicine leader, he's a dad of somebody who passed away actually this past year. His son Bertrand passed away. It was, yeah, very sad. Who was the first diagnosed case of something called NGLY1 deficiency, and so this is near and dear to my heart. So I will answer both of those questions all at once about what interests me. What, if I had $1 trillion, would I throw more money at? plus about undiagnosed diseases. And so for me, what's really calling me now is the effects of military exposures. And I think it scientifically is fascinating, right? I mean, it will certainly exist at the intersection between genomics, a person's, nature versus nurture, about what they've been exposed to, what their genetic predispositions may be to react to certain toxins or exposures, and so that's something where we are developing a strategic plan in that area. We have not, when I'm, I think, wasn't this from like Dirty Dancing? When I'm wrong, I say I'm wrong. I think the dad said that. So I think, the VA can and should, and there have been advances in technology such that that we can and should step up our work on military exposures. And I give it as an example, the veterans living with Gulf War illness. So there are about 200,000 of those veterans, which pretty much makes the cutoff for a rare disease, 200,000 or fewer people. And it, to this day, doesn't even have set diagnostic criteria. It's a multi-symptom illness among people who served during a certain time in a certain place. And that's basically it. And for, this was, I heard echoes of this in the Undiagnosed Diseases Network, that sometimes when somebody has a mysterious medical illness, you wonder if it is physiologic or psychological in origin, and sometimes there are contributing factors. But for many years, the Gulf War veterans were told that it was primarily psychological in origin, and at the same time, there are objective findings. So I am firmly in the camp, and I think most of science has progressed to the place where we say this is something that is physiologic in origin, but we don't understand it. And so the field of military exposures and potential impacts on people is vast. So it's my fifth priority, which I also announced this fiscal year, is building community through VA research. Okay. And so I think that it's only through building this community with our veterans that we'll be able to take on really the enormous task of saying there's so much ground to cover. We don't have $1 trillion. We have a certain budget assigned to this. How do we prioritize? We need your help in figuring out where we should put our funds to make the maximum impact for you, because it's ultimately, we are working for them to answer these questions. And so that, to me, sort of answers both of your questions. That's the area where we're going to be doing a big push in that area, including, including impacts on cancers, potential impacts on cancers, which, is another area we're working on very vigorously, precision oncology. So I'm really, I'm excited to get started on that. I'm also truly humbled by the task in front of us, because it is enormous.
Absolutely. I take my hat off to you for this amazing responsibility before you. It's really amazing, inspiring. Rachel, we typically do a wrap-up question about influencers and mentors. You mentioned Matthew Might and his son Bertrand. You mentioned your father, of course. Other people you might want to take the time to mention, shout out to, obviously, there's hundreds of thousands of them in the VA alone, but take a little time, if you would, to mention, shout out to whomever you want that have been really instrumental and inspiring to you, to keep you on this path and this enormous task in front of you.
Obviously, my mom, whom unfortunately I lost this year, not due directly to COVID, but like many older people being at home, she was deconditioned and fell. But she was a music teacher and a great champion of my education. She took me many times to the Museum of Science and Industry. Just a wonderful mom, very nurturing, and also encouraging in my role. And I actually wrote about this in a piece in one of the nature journals about, I lost my husband also 10 years ago, and he was a great inspiration to me. He was in the field of AI and really the most brilliant person I've ever met. Had gone to music conservatory, studied philosophy, knew things about art, also did artificial intelligence. And was a very romantic person, I have to say. So I miss him terribly, and still feel so fortunate that he was a part of my life. I also want to give two more shout outs. One to Zach Kohane, who is the head of the Department of Biomedical Informatics and is an Uber professor at Harvard Medical School. And he was a person who gave me my chance to, when I said I switched from the K Award to running this program that I bungled the name of, but Substitutable Medical Apps Reusable Technologies, they needed an executive director for that. And when I went around, telling everybody I knew that I wanted to be this high-level facilitator, he offered me this job, despite the fact that I had no experience to speak for me. So he gave me a chance, and I'm grateful for that. And then along with that, I'm grateful to a person called Dick Nodell, who is my executive coach, organizational consultant during those early years, and even to this day provides advice of showing me how to be an authentic leader. You don't have to be a cookie cutter person. You don't have to fit into the standard box of what a leader looks like. You can be your authentic self in a leadership position and have a lot of fun, even as you face challenges. So I'm really grateful to all of those people and I love my job. I know I'm very, very fortunate to be in this position.
Absolutely. Very, very inspiring stuff. And thank you again for sharing about your husband, and also very sorry to hear about the loss of your mother, but I appreciate you sharing that as well. Rachel, as I said, it's always fascinating listening to you, extremely inspiring at the task that's in front of you, but there's no one better to do it than you. And wishing you the much success and with it moving forward. For everybody that's going to be listening to this episode on the podcast network, or listening or watching on YouTube, you've been listening to the amazing Dr. Rachel Ramoni, Chief Research and Development Officer, United States Department of Veterans Affairs, overseeing, facilitating thousands of active projects, research, innovation, all for the benefit of human health. Rachel, it's been an honor. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to do this. Thank you for everything you're doing. And as we say, thank you for helping to create a better tomorrow through what you do. It's very impressive and inspiring.
Thank you. You'll have to tell me about you next time.
It's not a cool story, but great seeing you.
Nice to see you.